One thing that I've been doing quite a bit recently is making you all feel old, because a lot of events are having milestone anniversaries at the minute, and when I talk about them you start to feel really bad inside because, well, like me, you might be thinking, well, I remember watching that, how can it have been 20 years, 30 years, however many years since that thing happened? It's like getting advice from somebody and you don't want to listen to them because their birth year starts with a 2. My wife works with somebody who doesn't remember VHS tapes and wasn't around for the Spice Girls. She was then quite upset when I told her that in 20 years' time she'll be working with somebody who won't know what an iPod is. Let that one sink in for a second. But recently I made you all feel old because last week I did a video for the 30th anniversary of the first and only win for Jean Todt. That coming at the 1995 Canadian Grand Prix. The man who was Charles Leclerc before Charles Leclerc probably should have won a lot more if not for luck, and somebody should really do a 23andMe test on Charles Leclerc to see if he, Alesi and Chris Amon are actually related. Because those three people can't all be that unlucky in equal measure. But yesterday I was made to feel old because it was 20 years to the day that Formula 1 had its most embarrassing moment in its 75-year history. 2005. I was just about to finish year 9. That summer I played the Spalding Party in the Park on the same bill as Acoustic Chumbawamba, you know, I Get Knocked Down and I Get Up Again, and The South, made up of members of the band, The Beautiful South. The first series of Deadliest Catch, Numbers, Supernatural and a rebooted Doctor Who featuring Christopher Ecclestone were all on our screens for the first time, along with comedy panel show 8 out of 10 Cats. Honourable mentions go to The Apprentice, The Thick of It, which is one of my favourite comedies of all time and where we get the words catastrophe and omnishambles, and The Jeremy Kyle Show. And in terms of what you were downloading illegally to MP3, there was Stars of CCTV by Hard-Fi, You Could Have Had It So Much Better by Franz Ferdinand, Mesmerise and Hypnotise by System of a Down, Block Party's Silent Alarm, Demon Days by Gorillaz, Maximo Park's A Certain Trigger, and Weezer's Make Believe. But at the same time, Formula 1 was at the end of an era. The last V10 season. Sort of. There will be somebody ready to be clever in the comments of going, you forgot the Toro Rosso, so I'll rephrase. It was the last all V10 season. The rules were going to be changing for 2006, reducing the engine capacity down to 2.4 litres and also lopping off 2 cylinders, so we'd go into the V8 era. But this last season of the V10 era was set to go down in history because there was another era ending at the same time. The era of Michael Schumacher dominance. Ferrari and Bridgestone had not been able to adapt well enough to the new rules for 2005. The main difference between 2004 and 2005 is that the front wings had been raised slightly to reduce downforce at the front and to try and slow the cars down. At the same time, they brought in one of the most controversial rule changes ever seen, in that teams could no longer change tyres over the course of a Grand Prix. If you're learning this for the first time, I swear I'm not making this up. Tyres now had to last the whole race. Actually, it was the whole race and qualifying, because the tyres you qualified on were the tyres you raced on, and Michelin, probably owing to their endurance racing background, had managed to build a tyre that was hard-wearing, durable and maintained performance. Previously, the Michelins were a little bit harder than the Bridgestones and took a bit longer to heat up, going through a longer graining phase, while the Bridgestones could be turned on a lot earlier. The crossover would sort itself out later on in the stint though, and they'd overlap in performance. Eventually. As well as this, the Michelins performed much better in hot weather. If the race was hot, put your money on a Michelin car to win. Same way you'd put money on a Bridgestone car to win in similar conditions during 1997. But because of the changes, it meant that Michelin's top 2 teams in Renault and McLaren were dominating the season. Meanwhile, Bridgestone only had one team that they could put all their resources into, and that was Ferrari. And they weren't performing so well. The Ferrari F2005 had shown a couple of flashes of the glory days. Glory days that were less than 12 months in the past. At Imola, Schumacher had started low down the order but worked his way up to second, having a battle with Alonso towards the end that has made the highlight reels for eternity. Even if he couldn't get past with a smaller car in a V10, which is apparently the magic bullet to the current issues in Formula 1, but anyway, his other good result of the season was at Canada, where he once again finished second. But the rest of the season wasn't good. The Michael retired from the first race in Australia, in the old F2004 called the F2004M, where he was involved in a collision with Heidfeld. And this is on top of a 10-place grid drop he received for an engine change penalty, so he started back in 19th. He retired again at Bahrain, the first race for the F2005, when the hydraulics went. A result unthinkable given how bulletproof that Ferrari had been over the last 5 or 6 years. In Spain, he suffered a puncture and couldn't continue, even if the rules did say that you could change a punctured tyre. You have to make it back to the pits though, obviously. With those 2 results accepted, he'd been 7th at Malaysia, 7th at Monaco, and 5th at the Nürburgring. When Schumacher left the Canadian Grand Prix after finishing 2nd, he was 5th in the standings, having gone into that race an unthinkable 8th. Alonso led the way on 59 points with Raikkonen 2nd on 37. Trulli was 3rd on 27 points in his Toyota with Heifels Williams in 4th. Schumacher is there in 5th, and the rest of the points are on your screen. The top 4 in the standings were not all just different teams, which is rare, but they were all Michelin runners. Just 3 teams were running Bridgestones that year: Ferrari, Jordan and Minardi. Everybody else was on the French stuff. Why they all swapped over, I have no idea. It's a question for which I have no answer, and I can't find the answer anywhere. Maybe it's because Bridgestone was making tyres specifically for the Ferraris and making everybody else just cope, and the other teams were going, yeah, you know what, we can't be bothered with that. But by the time they left Indianapolis after the US Grand Prix weekend, I think the other teams were starting to wish they'd never signed on with Michelin. In practice 1, things were going as normal, until Ricardo Zonta's Toyota spun in the infield section as his left rear let go. At the time, people just saw it as one of those things. Tyres fail. It happens. It had happened already that season with Schumacher at Barcelona. It was also practice. Maybe something had been blown onto the track, or there was something left over from a club race, or whatever. Like I said, it happens. But when Ralf Schumacher slammed the wall coming out of the banking in second practice, it was not seen as being a simple coincidence, because both Toyotas had now had a failure. What you also have to remember is that Ralf had broken his back in the exact same place with exactly the same failure the year before. So when he was able to get out of the car under his own steam, people were relieved. Unlike the IndyCar circuit today that you might have seen me stream an iRacing IndyCar League race from last year, cars exited the right-hander at the end of the infield section and then skipped that complex entirely, ragging their V10 powered monsters through the final corner, which was the famous banking of the Oval's turn 1, because they're running clockwise, not anti-clockwise, innit? In the race all-star battle that we did during the pandemic, we were joking around in the drivers WhatsApp group the morning of the race at Indianapolis. Hang on a minute, don't Formula Renault 3.5s use Michelin tyres? Should we be worried if we're using the old F1 layout of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway? But at the time, the teams and drivers weren't joking around, because the technicians from Michelin had inspected a lot of the tyres at those Michelin teams and let out a collective merde. That's French for bother. The Michelin technicians found vertical cuts on Jarno Trulli's car as well. Toyota were told, "You're running the pressures too low," which was later rebuked by the tyre pressures being nowhere close to the minimum that Michelin said was safe. Not only that, Michelin had found those same vertical cuts that were on Jarno's car on cars belonging to at least 3 other teams. The data was sent back to the Michelin HQ in France, and they came back with some grim reading. John Howett, the Toyota boss at that time, told motorsport.com that what happened was there was a wave created in the sidewall of the tyre when they went through the banking. When the frequency of that wave matched the construction of the tyre, the sidewall would start to fall apart. If the corner wasn't banked, it wouldn't be so much of a problem, but because of the vertical load in that corner, the tyre basically turned to wet paper because of the harmonics that were going through the sidewalls. It's the same principle as these opera singers that can shatter a wine glass just from singing one specific note. This is all audio engineering stuff, the degree is finally coming in useful. But there was one thing that was exasperating this issue. Just prior to that year's Indy 500, the track had been resurfaced and then diamond cut, which basically turned the corner into grip tape. Because the track was not perfectly smooth, the tyres were digging into the tiny grooves of the track and getting a bit of purchase, which was all designed to improve grip for the 500. After encountering issues in testing, Firestone had to change the construction of the tyres, and Bridgestone, the parent company of Firestone, was given all of this knowledge. Michelin, on the other hand, didn't get the memo. But on the other hand, they probably should have checked. BAR was saying that it would be stupid for the teams to do more than 10 laps before they had to come in and change their tyres. 10 laps being around the time where the chances went from risk to imminent. So the solution was chicane before the final corner, which, as a previous video will tell you, had already been done at least 3 times, with temporary chicanes installed at Barcelona, Montreal and Spa in 1994, with Montreal keeping the chicane through 1995. But as with everything in Formula 1, and particularly this particular time frame, the politics began. These kinds of things require unanimous decisions. All in favour? Everybody! All opposed? Ferrari. Because, of course it was. Now before you start typing, "Oh, I knew you were a Ferrari hater," it was actually in Ferrari's interests to refuse the chicane. Their tyre supplier had brought the right tyres. It wasn't their fault. But at the same time, it's not like Michelin had intentionally brought iffy rubber. But in the view of the Michelin teams, Ferrari's refusal was putting the whole race in jeopardy. It's not like one team had been affected. It was 75% of the grid or so. Meanwhile, Charlie Whiting and Bernie Ecclestone were saying, "Okay lads, leave it with us," and they went off to make some phone calls. Charlie Whiting was there and could sign off any changes if they were made because he was the race director and also the safety delegate. Tony George, the owner of the speedway, said he'd get his guys on the chicane immediately if it needed to be done. And Bernie was in favour of the chicane because he had a show to put on and Bernie likes getting paid. But Max Mosley? He had other ideas. The simple answer from Mosley, who wasn't there at Indianapolis that weekend, was no, even though he'd set a precedent with the Barcelona chicane in 1994. Whiting had also said that a chicane was not an option because the risk assessments were too high. This wasn't 1994 anymore, this was 2005, and things had changed drastically in 11 years. And if they had put a Barcelona-style chicane in with tyres and someone drove in there too hot and wiped them out, it would be carnage. A meeting had been called again on the Sunday morning with Bernie and Charlie also there. In the room were 9 of the 10 team representatives. So that's Ron Dennis, Flavio Briatore, Patrick Head of Williams, Peter Sauber, John Howard of Toyota, Christian Horner, Paul Stoddart of Minardi, Colin Collins of Jordan and Nick Fry of BAR. So all the Michelin guys and 2 of the 3 Bridgestone teams. The third was not present, that being Jean Todt of Ferrari. Charlie told them that his hands were tied and there would be no chicane, despite the Michelin teams putting him under tremendous pressure to do so. But Whiting was then horrified to find out that Bernie was putting plans in place to have one fitted anyway, a plan which was relayed to Mosley. And Max told his representative in the US that if anybody made any changes to the circuit, the race would be cancelled with immediate effect. At the same time, Michelin were hurriedly flying in some different spec tyres from Ohio to see if those would help, with FIA and Michelin boffins using Ron Dennis's jet to make the trip. Bernie then said he'd talk to Jean Todt to see what he thinks of all of this. Stoddart recalls that Bernie returned just before 11 AM, saying that Todt had said no to the proposals that the Michelin teams, along with Minardi and Jordan, were proposing, which was the already mentioned chicane, or painting a white line that separated the track in the banking. Basically, the Michelin teams would go higher and slower through the banking, while the Bridgestone teams would be able to go faster and take their normal line through things. It would look stupid, but at least everybody would be able to start the Grand Prix. The other plan was to use the pit lane every lap for extra safety, and no exception to the no tyre change rule couldn't be made because it was the rules. The rule allowed for one change in the name of safety, this coming in after Raikkonen's flat spot nuked his suspension at the Nürburgring, but all 4 in the name of safety was not doable. Stoddart was now feeling incredibly hacked off, because earlier that season, Mosley had threatened to cancel the Australian Grand Prix if Stoddart didn't pull the legal action that he'd taken against the FIA. Stoddart was beginning to think that Mosley had gone too far with his powers. So you might be thinking, why didn't they just make the race non-championship and they can run whatever rules they wanted? If they'd done that, all of the FIA staff would have had to have gone home. So there'd be no race director, no steward, no safety delegate, no safety car driver, nothing. Stoddart already had a tense relationship with the FIA, and felt that the FIA wanted him gone because he was hanging on by a thread and getting in the way of things. Stoddart wanted cost control and the FIA hated him for it. Jordan had already been sold and would become Midland for 2006, and Stoddart wrote in his account of the day, "It was clear that those in the room had lost all faith in Mr. Mosley and his ability to perform his function as president of the FIA in respect of Formula 1 matters." I'm sure that sentence will be treated with contempt by Mr. Mosley, but what must be realised is there are various reasons that other team principals and the most senior people in Formula 1 will not say publicly what they openly feel privately about Mr. Mosley, his politics and his governance of the sport. When the pit lane opened so the cars could go round to take their spots on the grid prior to the formation lap, Stoddart was horrified to see that the Jordans were the 2 cars to go out first, followed by the 2 Ferraris. Through very, very, very gritted teeth, Stoddart decided to send out the 2 Minardis. He didn't want Mosley to have the satisfaction, and also he was a Bridgestone runner and was kind of contractually obliged to do so, but really, he couldn't afford to do otherwise. The Michelin teams also taking to the grid led to some sort of hope that some compromise had been reached. But on the grid, one journalist that was there saw Ron Dennis go up to several select individuals, point at the sky with one finger, and then made the motion of slitting his throat. What that meant would come clear very soon, but for everybody watching at home and at the track, it was business as usual. I started watching the formation lap and then I quickly left the room to grab a drink before the race itself got underway. When I got back, I noticed that there weren't 20 cars on the grid anymore. There were only 6 cars on the grid. And if you watched it live like I did, we probably had the same reaction. That reaction being, what the f*** is this? All the Michelin teams pulled into the pits and stopped at their respective garages. Dennis's hand signals made sense. One lap, then kill the engine. Schumacher, Barrichello, Montero, Karthikeyan, Albers and Frieschacher were the only 6 cars on the grid. 2 Ferraris in 5th and 7th, 2 Jordans in 17th and 19th, and the 2 Minardis in 18th and 20th. The 5 lights went on, they went out, and 6 cars started their race. The only overtake was when Karthikeyan overtook Albers for 4th. Now this was the days before smartphones and social media. Nobody knew anything was about to happen until pole sitter Trulli pulled into the pits, with everybody else behind following suit. Alonso recalled being told that if Raikkonen stayed out, he'd stay out. If Raikkonen came in, he'd come in. The crowd was understandably a bit hacked off. Beer bottles were being thrown onto the track, although if it's Budweiser I'd want to throw it as far away as I possibly could, just not onto an active racetrack, and the booze could be heard over the engines. It wasn't a good look for a sport that had spent the last 30 years or so trying to get a foothold in a country that prefers IndyCar and NASCAR. It was the most baffling thing I've watched in 30 years. Just 6 cars tootling around doing nothing. I turned it off after about 10 laps, I don't know about you. But the most entertaining part of this race was Stoddart talking to Dutch media. Now if you're watching this with young children floating around, you might want to have them pop out for a few minutes. I'm not in the slightest bit interested. This is the saddest day in Formula 1 history. We had the chance to have a race here this afternoon and it was denied by the non-approval to have a chicane. The Michelin runners have my sympathy, and the only reason my cars are out there is because the Jordans went out, having agreed this morning that they wouldn't go out. But I can't do anything. I'm a Bridgestone runner. I don't take any pleasure in this. This isn't a race, it's a farce, and my apologies go out to the fans here today and the millions and millions watching on television around the world. This is why Formula 1 needs to be a sport and not... I'm just angry. No, I'm not angry with you, Jack. I was just going to swear on your TV station I thought better of it. Oh, I can? You sure? This is fucking crazy. The FIA needs to get a grip with itself and sort this sport out before there's no fucking sport to sort out. This today is bullshit. The championship is over for Minardi. We were only fighting Jordan. This bullshit race finishes our season here. We can't overtake them in the points now. It's not just screwed the Michelin runners, but screwed the battle between Minardi and Jordan. 9 teams, forget Ferrari, agreed that unless that chicane was put in, we wouldn't race. And it's not Jean Todt, he just very nicely stayed out of it all. In case you're wondering, Schumacher won, Barrichello was 2nd and Montero was 3rd. And Montero was probably the only happy guy there that day. With the posts that various F1 themed accounts have posted over the last 24 hours or so, one of the recurring comments is that it's Michelin who is to blame for this. But while Michelin held their hands up and took accountability for the tyre not being up to snuff, it's not like they intentionally brought a bad tyre. With the FIA's absolutely insane rule about no tyre changes, Michelin made up some of the performance by having a more deformable sidewall than what Bridgestone had. And as the loads increased through the banking of what is turn 13 on that track, the sidewalls started to tear themselves apart, due to the loads on the tyre, the harmonics going through them, and everything else. But at the same time, Bridgestone was given the heads up about the changes to the surface, while Michelin wasn't. Basically what had happened was Michelin had designed a tyre that was capable of going through every single corner at every single track on the Formula 1 calendar, except for one specific corner at one specific circuit. The only one of its type that they were going to go through. So Michelin had brought a tyre that was not up to the task, but the politicking wasn't helping things either. Michelin was right to pull out, because if a car had crashed in that race they could have faced charges in Indiana for allowing their drivers to go out in unsafe vehicles. But the FIA and Ferrari doing their bits and pieces just poured jet fuel onto the already raging inferno. But it was in Ferrari's interest to say no. They'd got tyres that could handle it. It wasn't their issue. It was Michelin's. And as a result, Schumacher got his only win of the season. It does make you wonder if the roles had been reversed and we had no Bridgestone runners. 14 cars looks a lot better than 6, doesn't it? It also shows you just how bad of a season Schumacher was having that year. He needed 14 cars to not start a Grand Prix to be able to win a Grand Prix. So really, it's a combination of things. Michelin didn't do any due diligence in tyre testing. The Speedway didn't tell Michelin that Firestone had to redesign the tyres for that year's 500 and that Michelin should consider doing the same. And then you've got the FIA having the "not our problem, you should have built better tyres" thing, as well as being really stubborn over any compromises. Then you've got Ferrari for putting their chances of a win ahead of the sport. But with Ferrari, it's still understandable. 2025 Christian Horner and Toto Wolff would have done exactly the same thing if, say, front wings were failing through there. But that issue would lose just 2 cars, not 14. And I think that's the issue that people had with Ferrari over this. Michelin must have thought the tyres would still be fine, but they weren't, and so on. I think you see my point. But that was 20 years ago now. The closest thing we've had since is the 2021 Belgian Grand Prix, where the FIA just did everything they could to tick several boxes and say, yep, we had a race, hand out points, let's go home, and then move on to the next race. But with the 2005 United States Grand Prix, it was just totally mental. And if you've got any opinions for this, do leave them on a rather large postcard. So then, a look at the absolute farce that was the 2005 United States Grand Prix on its 20th anniversary. Well, yesterday was the anniversary, but I don't upload on Thursdays. If this has been a fun look through the motorsport history books, then do give the video a like so I know a good job was done. And for more like this from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on any future videos that I do. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon who continue to support me at a more personal level. And if you want to help with the image purchasing or keeping these lights and computer on, then a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Or there's super thanks if you want to do a one and done donation, and memberships if you want a Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.